Hello, I'm Robert Emmett Hernan. I'm head of Bluestack Productions, the publisher of Irish Environment, an online magazine covering environmental matters on the island of Ireland. I'm very happy today to be here in Brussels at the Friends of the Earth in Europe with Magda Stoczkiewicz. Magda Stoczkiewicz, thank you. Yeah. Magda, you're very welcome. Now you're the director of Friends of Earth Europe. And can you tell me, we've interviewed in the past here Friends of the Earth in Ireland, Friends of the Earth in Northern Ireland. Could you give the audience a sense of what Friends of the Earth Europe does that kind of is differentiated from kind of the individual network members?
Sure. So Friends of the Earth Europe is an office that was set up here more than 25 years ago in a recognition that actually Brussels became more and more important as a legislation center for the EU member states. And since then the office grew, both in terms of size and functions, the way how we work. So we have kind of a double function. On the one hand, we do a lot of advocacy. We follow the legislative processes here that we do important for the environment and for people. We try to influence them to be more environmentally relevant, or not destructive for the environment. But we also coordinate our national member groups, and as such, our network has now 31 member groups. They work on the national level. They have structures to work further down on the local level, while we coordinate campaigns which try to coordinate European campaigns, so that in several countries the groups are, for example, working on the same issue or have the same demands, let it be on climate or let it be on energy. We also share information. We gather intelligence here in Brussels. We share information with the member groups, but we also ask them to influence their national authorities, their governments, because at the end it's the governments in the council who take decisions here in Brussels.
Now, how many members do you have working on staff here at the Friends of the Earth Europe?
We have overall, including interns, we are about 30 plus office. Okay. So it's quite a lot for Brussels environmental NGO. As I said, we are different maybe than some other NGOs here, environmental NGOs, because we are not only doing advocacy work and lobbying here. We are doing a lot of support to the members and also bringing the voices of our members to Brussels.
Now Magda, let me ask you this: when if you have to advocate a position within the European structure on behalf of Friends of the Earth in Europe, how do you reach a consensus? I presume that there are times when certain issues might have different views.
It's a very good question, and we mentioned the European level, but actually Friends of the Earth is a worldwide network with members across the world in about 80 countries. So reaching strategic positions has to happen also on the international level, first of all. And of course, you can imagine that there are different, even cultural differences that we have to cherish, but at the same time they can be a challenge in reaching positions. As we are a federation, there is no way that we can impose any positions. It has to come with a process of discussions, sharing different arguments and building up a position that everyone would feel comfortable in to advocate for. And we also recognize that on national level the reality might be particular, and that some of the member groups may not be able to advocate the same position in the same way. But we definitely take time to get to a position and to agree that the whole network feels comfortable with what the position is.
Now, Magda, I wonder if you could give the audience a sense of just generally the range of kinds of activities or work that the Friends of the Earth Europe does, and then we can get into a couple specific ones that we want to talk about.
I think our member groups, they work really on a variety of environmental issues, domestic but also international. So there is definitely quite a big amount of groups working on biodiversity, protecting nature, one way or another. And this is an area which we only started now to coordinate more from the Brussels level as well. And actually take a stock of all this exceptionally interesting work that is going on the national level. The first book that we published, The Keepers, maybe I can show it.
Yes.
It's in a way a story of the individuals in our member groups who are taking care of nature. Some of them, I would say, they literally have nature in their hands because they help, for example, turtles to make it from the beach to the sea when they are born. They help protecting bigger and smaller parts of the ecosystems. But they also protect nature in a way of fighting, for example, companies that want to dump toxic waste in the Norwegian fjords. It's one of the big campaigns that we are doing now. And only the last year or two we started to collect this evidence and collect all examples of the really amazing job being done by really individuals. So this book also goes down to a person. These are personal stories of people who work with our member groups on the national level across Europe and who protect different bits and pieces of the environment and actually implement, let's say, sustainable lifestyle in some cases by living sustainably. I find it very inspirational because we've always knew that our member groups and their local members are working on biodiversity issues, but we've never had a tool to kind of show it and to collect the examples. But our member groups work also on variety of things. As I said, climate change is a big issue we've been working on for many years now. We turn much more into energy transformation, and that's also what our groups are working on. So advocating for energy efficiency, for community-owned renewables, which is a big campaign we are running from Brussels and on the national level, so that the people, communities can own renewables, and this way there is also a change in monopolism of companies who are energy companies into a community-owned electricity and energy, which we believe is very important because the world is really, and the system we live in is very much benefiting those who monopolize and who are big and who can, be big players on the market. And we believe that certain resources and certain sources like access to food, access to energy, access to water, these are things that are primarily need to benefit the communities. So in Europe, I think the community energy is something that is people are very interested, because especially in the financial crisis now, they actually would like to finance something that, bring a certain level of security for them to invest in, but also brings other benefits, because the small projects, they bring communities together, and they bring kind of additional added value of community life that has been in many places really forgotten in Europe. So this kind of work, we also work on agriculture and sustainable food production in many different ways, let it be by groups really working on specific agriculture schemes in their countries, or supporting healthy food and cooperatives producing food. There can be really variety of issues. Also bringing the attention to pesticides, chemicals that you can find in food, and the dangers it brings. So the health aspects of environmental pollution. Some of the member groups are doing more educational work with schools or with communities. So it really depends on the group, on how they, what's their priority, and how they fit within their national context.
Give me a chance to raise that whole issue of the 2030 targets, which I know you've been very active on too. I wonder if you could tell us what your involvement is with those targets and what your thinking is about those targets at this point.
At this point in time, when the discussion came on 2030 targets, we've been already working very intensively on energy efficiency and the previous directive on energy efficiency. We believe that energy efficiency is really one of the clever ways of doing things and becoming less dependent on imports, for example, from Russia or other fossil fuel countries that from which we import fossil fuels. And this is very much still kind of underestimated and under use opportunity. We concluded that the window of opportunity was on energy savings, also because this again was put as a target that would not be binding, and there was a question: will there be a target at all? Because initially there were some discussions that maybe we will have only greenhouse gas reduction target and nothing else. So we concentrated on making a strong case for energy efficiency and on really following the process very closely with the EU, the way how they prepared the impact assessment, they modeled their how the different targets would contribute to GDP increase, etc. We found ourselves in a very surrealistic situation, I would say, because we ended up basically fighting DG Klima for higher targets on energy efficiency. It was surprisingly the Commission that became a big obstacle in having higher targets. Partly because they wanted to please some of the member states, who didn't want to have targets. Partly also because there is this connection with the emissions trading system, and those who are in favor of emissions trading as the main mechanism, and this is unfortunately it's been unfortunately the top leadership of DG Klima, they didn't want to have ambitious energy savings because that would for them distort the ETS even further. Which again, if you look from the perspective that at least theoretically all these targets and all these measures are to prevent us from spiraling climate change and from going above 2 degrees. You find yourself in a very particular situation to have to try to convince by different ways of influencing, try to convince those who should be convinced in the first place that they need to be more ambitious. And it was actually the member states who introduced, even with the greenhouse gases, the 40% is not adequate to keep us on 2 degree path. So it was actually member states who introduced the word at least in front of 40 and not the Commission. So, and well, obviously we were very dissatisfied that at the end the member states, we managed to push the ambitious a bit on energy efficiency in the Commission proposal, while the member states then at the end push it down again. It is very worrying because the targets are by no means enough to keep us on 2 degrees, and from the studies of IPCC it's very clear that actually 2 degrees is probably already a level that would get us into runaway climate change, which means that if we are serious about not committing joint suicide as a humanity, then we need to talk about. My organization now got to a position where we advocate 1.5 degree as the maximum threshold. And what that means is that the remaining budget of greenhouse gas emissions need to be also fairly divided between the whole world, which means those who still need to progress into more sustainable communities, they also have to have a space to do that.
Now, if you were disappointed in working with the Commission on the 2030 targets, how do you feel about the new Commission that's now in place and that's sending some signals that has been very disturbing to the environmental community? And we were both at a conference yesterday with the European Environmental Bureau, and that was certainly the focus of the conversation there. How worried are you about that? Well, first, why don't you tell the audience just kind of what signals are coming from the new Commission and the President?
Yes. So I think when President Juncker announced the new Commission and the setup of different commissioners, but especially when he announced his priorities, which are growth and jobs, and the mission letters of the different commissioners, it became very clear that there is basically the environmental agenda is on the is being backpedaled from. President Juncker actually admits that he doesn't have too much heart for environmental issues. But the thing is that environmental issues are not only a necessity, it's also actually a very good job creator and a very good way of changing the economy so that it's not competing down with a race to the bottom for all the resources and minerals, etc., that we don't have necessarily here or can't afford here. So for us, it's a very worrying signal that first of all that the environment is clearly deprioritized at the time when we are facing environmental crisis of in many ways, climate wise, but also biodiversity loss, that it's at a huge pace, and well, the resource generally, we are not living within the limits of within the planetary limits, so we are actually taking from the earth much more that it can replenish, and therefore we are actually cutting the vital base of our existence as humanity. But also what we see is a very what we would say, it's an agenda that is very much responding to some claims about too much regulation coming from Brussels. And it's taken by some industry or industry associations like Business Europe as a brilliant opportunity to roll back on any kind of more progressive or necessary legislation. However, this is not something that came with this Commission suddenly out of the blue. We started to work on the regulation agenda, and the briefing we've done about a month ago shows that these elements of deregulation they've been there already for quite some time. The kind of lack of action of the previous Commission is part of this deregulation agenda as well, or manifests itself. Lack of ambition to go for targets, to have some more ambitious legislation started already before. What is definitely very worrying is the idea that with the new Commission, that they want to discontinue certain legislative dossiers that have been prepared by the previous Commission, like, for example, the circular economy package. So all the legislation that is connected to revision of the waste directives and waste targets and recycling targets, but also how we do eco-design, how we make sure that actually our economy starts to really use materials and resources in a very efficient way. But also a proposal to discontinue certain other dossiers, other legislative proposals. The thing is that this is taken, well, it comes from certain member states. The UK has been very vocal about red tape and cutting red tape. Similarly, maybe less vocal but also very active is the Netherlands. Poland doesn't want any targets, preferably on anything. The Dutch government also presented a report in July talking about, well, the UK talks about the red tape, the Netherlands talk about subsidiarity. What are the issues that should be done on the national level versus issues that should be done on the EU level, but the proposals of what to scrap are pretty similar to what the UK would advocate for as well. We still hope that we will be able to make a case why certain regulation is necessary, and I think in many cases you have also industry that says we want a level playing field, we want to have clarity and long-term perspective, and that's why we are not against regulation. While I think there is, especially on the level of the business associations like Business Europe, you see a trend to really go down to the lowest common denominator and to speak the voice of the most polluting and energy-heavy industry. I think it connects actually very well with the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment negotiations between the EU and US. Because the TTIP, as you probably know, is called the trade agenda, but it's actually a deregulatory agenda, as we believe. The Commission says no, the right to regulate would not be impacted. But if you see the investor-state dispute settlement mechanism that they want to have in, this is clearly a mechanism to chill any attempt to regulate more ambitiously. Because then investors can claim huge amounts of money for compensation for the profit that they haven't realized because of the change in regulation. With ISDS, we've noticed that the amount of cases went drastically up from the 90s that a lot of the bilateral trade agreements were signed by some of the what is now new member states of the EU, former communist countries. And it's very clear that the investors, big companies, are learning how to use the mechanism. But also there is a very good deal for a handful of law companies that are assisting the investor to claim costs for arbitration. One of the examples that we were analyzing is showing how the system is really perpetuated by vested interest is, for example, cases in Spain where because of the crisis the Spanish government was cutting subsidies for renewable energy, which was really very, very difficult and something that we were strongly opposing. But at the same time, the ones who were losing the most were private investors or national investors who were investing in renewables in Spain, because the bigger companies that invested from abroad, they went to claim their compensations via the ISDS type of mechanism. And what's interesting, we found out that there were several companies, law firms, that advised apparently those companies to invest just before the crisis really took on. So they were investing in renewable energy with an assumption that the subsidies will be cut, and then they will claim much bigger. They will have big claims on
the damages for
the damage.
Magda, thanks for talking with us today.
Thank you very much.